Yes, I see. Good news, everyone!
After half a year, I have finally completed my first year of college, and as a result, I should now have some more free time for both art and videos. So how's about it we do another video talking about some unreleased anime cards? And once again, it's going to be about an archetype from my favorite series, GX. Still not roids though. No, today we're talking about a different archetype, one that has already been printed despite not being released for over half a decade, fossils. Used by Jim Cook in the anime, this series of rocks were originally deemed too powerful to be printed due to their signature spell Fossil Fusion being a souped up version of Miracle Fusion, and even then they only came to be released because they ended up winning the most scuffed pull ever created, which I have previously talked about in this video. But they finally released, which is much better than some other decks, and we're finally in the hands of the players after so many years. There's just one problem.
Oh, they stink!
While the idea was clearly to fit them into being an OTK strategy going second, making use of the cards your opponent put in the graveyard to set up your fusions, the deck struggled for a multitude of reasons. It couldn't play into an established board very well, had no main deck presence whatsoever with only one monster you wanted to use, and worst of all, did not get any changes to adjust for the fact that Lynx and Xyz monsters existed. Yeah, for a deck that was considered too strong for its time, it's really fallen off compared to modern standards. But it's not like the deck is completely unsalvageable. Going second decks like Tenpai and Gemini have been able to find success in the modern day, even if one of those decks is very hated. I have tried making these cards work a couple times, seeing a bit of success with Vernis Elves, but there's nothing amazing. Clearly what we need is a new way for support, but Konami seems keen on neglecting the deck despite it winning the archetype poll. We wanted these cards printed so badly, so why won't you give us any new blood? Or perhaps, give us some old blood? Despite winning the poll, Konami never gave us all of Jim's cards. Hell, Fossil Machines and Shell Knight weren't released till that year's premium pack, so we do have a couple cards that could be printed. And that is where something very interesting happens for me specifically. If you watched some of my previous videos, you'll know that in the Magnet Warrior video, I mentioned how I was working on a video about anime rock cards, which would have included these cards as well. And if you're wondering where that video went, well, truthfully, it's likely never coming out. After losing the initial motivation for the video, I decided to reevaluate it and realized that I just wasn't as passionate about the stuff that was on offer. Aside from the fact that most of the generic cards weren't very interesting, Agent was a pretty lackluster deck that only really had an interesting thing by pairing it with Millennium, but I really don't care about Millennium. And while Alchemy Beast was a deck that I found interesting, half of the cards do the exact same thing, so it just did not make for an interesting video. The only decks that I could see myself revisiting are Zexal's Magnets, which might actually get their own video at some point, and Pendulum Statue, which has a similar issue to Alchemy Beast, but has a more interesting design direction that I could potentially go into, with it being designed as pendulum support for certain types and attributes, meaning that they could serve as generic pendulum support for certain decks, similar to how incantations are generic ritual supports. So that just leaves Fossil to get its own video. But at first I thought it would be impossible because they only have 4 cards to talk about. Hey, you know Jim actually has 7 anime cards, right?
Whoa!
So while I was right about there being initially 4 cards, which were the ones that specifically worked with rock monsters and would have been included in the original video, there are 3 more cards that Jim used that have generic effects, but could be made into fossil support when they get printed, bringing us up to 7 cards, meaning that it's on par with Junk Robots, which I had previously covered. So with that, I feel like there are enough cards to talk about in order to do this video. So let's take up some of these old fossils and see what we can do with them. Beginning with the 4 cards that would have been included in the original video, we have 2 rock monsters, a spell, and a trap card. Sample Fossil is the first of these cards, being a rock with unknown attack and 0 defense, and when it's normal summoned, targets a level 4 or lower monster in your opponent's graveyard and resummons it to your field. It can't attack or be attributed, but while it's there, Sample Fossil gains its attack. So is there any specific reason why this didn't just equip the monster to itself? I actually thought that's how the effect worked, until I reread it for this video, and I think it's very strange that it works this way. It is very likely that it will be changed to equip itself to it, but even if it doesn't, that actually could be beneficial. See, around the time of Arc 5, One of the things that Konami started to do more frequently was giving archetypes monsters that could fuse on their own. Think things like Sundew, and I think Sample Fossil could fill that role very nicely. One of the issues that this deck does have is that the only way to make their fusions is with Fossil Fusion. And while that is a good card, if you're not able to get to it, then it means you're kind of cut off your fusion summons. And honestly, I'm pretty sure Konami does know that's an issue, and will most likely give them a way to fusion someone without Fossil Fusion when they make new support. And I think Sample Fossil would be one of those good ways to do it, being able to fusion summon a Fossil Fusion monster using cards on your field or in your hand as material, including itself. It would also give a use to the revive effect, as you could bring something back to use for the fusion summon, though it would likely need to be negated, as I could see it potentially being an issue if you could bring something back and then use its effect on summon. Now there is one slight issue with this play because of how the fusion monsters work. If we were to print this card as written, it would only be able to make the Fossil Warriors, as Fossil Machines and Fossil Dragons require monsters to be in the graveyard for the summon. And I don't know if I need to tell you this, but monsters on field or in the hand aren't in the graveyard. To fix this, we would need to find some sort of workaround for it, and I think I do have a potential idea. My first thought was to try and do something with approximating the levels, but instead I think the best idea would actually be taking a hint from Drytron. Instead making it care about the monster's attack points by tributing itself and a monster with equal or less attack than the fusion it wants to make. So if I wanted to summon Skullgirl, I would need to tribute a monster with 2500 or more attack. While this would mean you wouldn't be able to use hand traps for the fusion summons like you could with Fossil Fusion, it's a very clean way to make an effect like this work, and it would even let you use a Link or an Xyz summon you revived for the effect. I think this is probably the best way we could get it to work. Also, I hadn't mentioned how we could change the on summon effect aside from negating the monster that was brought back, but it could also use a few tweaks. Namely, it should trigger on normal or special summon, and it should allow you to revive a guy from your own graveyard. So you could do things like revive a Weathering Soldier and want to tribute it for a stronger fusion, or maybe even not have it negate them if they mention Fossil Fusion, and allow them to attack, which would allow you to revive one of your Fossil Fusion monsters that got sent to the graveyard, and potentially deal double their attack as damage. Also, I guess you could do some Mad Emancipator stuff where you revive a guy for a synchro climbing, or link them on to make Dogu. Overall would be pretty nice, though I do want to go on a bit of a tangent and ask, why does this card look so different than the Fossil Machines? I get the idea behind it was that it was based on fossil excavation, which is a cool way to tie into the thematic, but why are the rest of the Fossil Machines based on cars rather than the excavation equipment? In fact, why wasn't this used as fusion material for either of their summons? The other unreleased fossil monster is Uluru's Guardian. I really hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's a level 4 rock monster with 2500 defense, 0 attack, and its effect is...
I don't know.
There's some conflicting evidence as to what the effect does. Yugipedia, which is what I use as my main source of reference for these, says when this card is normal summoned, change it to defense mode. If this card is changed from face down defense position to face up defense, destroy it, with the rest of its effect being unknown. While Yu-Gi-Oh! Wiki instead says, if this card is targeted by an opponent's card effect, you can send one face-up trap card you control to the graveyard to negate that card's effect until the end phase. Now, I can't read Japanese, so I can't actually tell what this card says, so instead I'll have to do the next best thing I can, which is seeing if Google Translate can figure this out. And assuming the translation is correct, the result of it appears to be closer to what Yugipedia has written down, so I'm going to work off the assumption that that is the correct one. However, if this is incorrect and the other one is the correct one, I'm sorry. I mean, admittedly, it doesn't mean anything in the end because both these effects are pretty terrible. It's a very 2006 effect, which makes sense because it's a 2006 card. The self-destruct when flipped face up is really the type of downside they put on a level 4 defender back in the day, which is extra redundant due to its first effect. And given that we have a card like Guard Mantis, which has more defense points and has actual upsides, we're gonna need to do some legwork to make this card able to defend its home properly. And I actually have some very simple changes that could do the trick. Firstly, since Shell Knight was changed to apply its on-summon effect while switching to defense mode, let's apply the same line of thinking to Uluru, switching it to defense mode and applying an effect once it does. And the effect in question is to send a card that mentions Fossil Fusion from your deck to the grave. Shell Knight and Weathering Soldier both have good search effects, so making them easier to trigger by giving the deck an Armageddon Knight would be really helpful. The second effect I have in mind is a bit more of an interesting one, because it both helps the deck and fixes a stupid design choice of one of their cards. Basically, we give Uluru the Lone Fire Blossom effect. letting it tribute itself to summon another monster that mentions Fossil Fusion. This would put Uluru in grave for the fusion summon of your monsters, but it would also help one of their previous monsters, Flint Kragger. In case you don't know what it does since it doesn't really see play, Flint Kragger on special summon discards a card to send a Fossil Fusion monster from your extra deck to the graveyard. Also it can tribute itself to deal 500 damage, then if Fossil Fusion is in grave, returns a banished Fossil Fusion monster to the graveyard. This is a good effect. Skullgirl can grab fusion so dumping it can get you to your fusions, and if you already have a way to fusion, you can send Skullbone to grab Time Stream. The discard itself can set up for the fusion summons, and the recycle could allow you to put your fusions back to reuse their effects. It's a very strong effect, pairs well with their cards, and most notably, is impossible to achieve in Archetype, because none of their cards have a way to special summon this guy. This means in order to get this effect off, you need to rely on outside support such as Adamantibators, Vernicelfs, or Doki Doki, the latter two requiring discards. And while Adamantibator doesn't need a discard, and pairing one of the level 2s with Flint Kragger makes Naturia Beast, you still need to find them off of it. So making Uluru a Lone Fire Blossom would solve this issue by allowing you to easily get to them, and could set up a bit of the combo. With just Uluru in hand, you could go Uluru send Shell Knight Surge a 10, then tag Uluru into Flint Kragger. Flint discards a 10 to send Skullgirl, Skullgirl banished to grab Fusion, then fuse the 8 with Shell Knight to make Skull King. Finally, you can use Flint Kragger's effect to deal 500, then return Skullgirl to the grave for next turn. And that's just one combo. There's also lines where you could send Weathering Soldier, or lines involving summoning out Sample Fossil, and so much more. A card like this would work wonders as a starter for the deck. But I'm not done yet, because I think there's one final effect that we could give it, which would make it even more tasty, and be very fitting for this card. That being, that if this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you could set a Fossil Fusion spell or trap card. The reason why I feel this would be thematic will become clear in a couple seconds, but this would mean that searching this card off a soldier, then discarding it with Flint Kragger, would allow you to grab any Fossil Fusion related back row, which can allow many new combos, such as using Time Stream stuff, or even grabbing Specimen Inspection. Hell, maybe even grab Miracle Rupture to trigger Shell Knight. Oh, and if you're wondering how this would work with a tribute effect, it would probably tribute for cost rather than effect, meaning it wouldn't activate this itself. I think these changes would turn this card from one that is extremely underwhelming to an absolute staple in the deck, and would fix a ton of issues for the archetype on its own. Now, as for why I think back row setting would be very fitting, that would be because of this card. Uluru the Guardian Spirit is a continuous trap card that summons itself as a level 4 rock monster on activation, with 0 attack, 2500 defense, though it is still treated as a trap card. When special summoned, all attack position monsters your opponent controls must attack this card if able, but during the end phase it self-destructs, and can only be activated if Uluru is in the grave. Being a trap monster is already an interesting choice for this deck, because it's actually not very beneficial since you can't use traps as fusion material for Fossil Fusion, and its main effect isn't super amazing. Definitely not worth having a self-destruct condition, which definitely could be removed since it was only there to get it off the field during the Supreme King's duel. However, I do have some ideas how to make this card actually really good for the deck. The idea of this card is that it forces your opponent into battle with it, and as you may have seen with Tenpai, this can be a very strong way to do a reverse OTK. So, I think this is a good start, but let's see how we can improve it. Firstly, while swinging it into your 2500 defender is nice, I think it would actually be better if you could force them to attack your mark monster who has the highest attack or defense. This would mean ending on something like Skull Gears would result in your opponent crashing into something extremely powerful and taking a ton of damage, or if you end on Skull Convoy, they'll be forced to continuously attack in the Spirit, which is still beneficial since Skull Convoy will drop their stats. Additionally, some protection would be nice, so that way you guys don't get destroyed in the main phase. Sadly, I don't think Destruction Protection is on the table because there's another card we'll be talking about that does something similar, but what we can do is give them Targeting Protection. Now you may think that seems a bit of a dungeon since Fossil Fusion already gives Targeting Protection, but that's only against monster effects, whereas this would include spell and trap cards. Plus, if you're going first, you very likely won't be using monsters in both graveyards. The final effect change I have in mind is something related to mentioning Fossil Fusion, and I think for this it's going to be a very simple change. This card can reset itself during the end phase if Fossil Fusion is in the graveyard, but banish it when it leaves the field. This would give it a bit of repeatability, which would definitely be appreciated by the deck. The banish is standard for cards like this so they can't be used an infinite amount of times, but it can be bypassed by making an Xyz monster with it, such as Galling Granite, or more specifically, Redoer, since this is a trap card you can put under them, turning on their banish effect. Combine this with Allure to set it, and you actually have a pretty incredible combo for the deck. The final card from the original rock video is the field spell Sacred Defense Barrier. While active, anytime a rock monster is summoned, it gains a protection counter, and if it would be destroyed, the counter goes in its place. The card also says it only does this on normal summon, but it does work on special summon since we see it combo with Guardian Spirit and Gaia Plate. Protection for your rocks would have been nice back when this card appeared in the anime, but it has since been outclassed by Block Dragon, who is currently banned, so I guess there is actually space for this card. First things first though, let's do the obvious and let us search a monster that mentions Fossil Fusion. This has been the bare minimum for field spells for quite some time, but I'll do you one better actually. If we later take a monster that mentions Fossil Fusion and either adds it to your hand or sends it to the graveyard, I could see some interesting things being done with it. This would open up some new lines when paired with Uluru, being able to either search it outright or send Soldier to search it, all the while sending to your graveyard for your fusions. But that's not the main effect this is known for, that's the protection effect, which could definitely use an upgrade. Introducing a random counter mechanic just to protect your guys is very good, so I think the best solution would be to remove the counters and instead give it the ability to protect your cards that mention Fossil Fusion from being destroyed once per turn. This would be a massive buff as it would allow you to protect your guys over multiple turns. And if you notice, I said cards that mention Fossil Fusion, not Fossil Fusion monsters, meaning it would protect itself. Plus with Spirit giving targeting protection, it gives your board the defensive protection that it has needed for quite some time. However, all of these changes don't solve one of the biggest issues that fossils have, namely the fact that their stronger fusion monsters, which are the actually good ones, are difficult to set up. Outside of Shell Knight searching a level 8 monster you can discard with Flint Cracker, there's no way to make them, and even doing this doesn't let you use an opponent's card. And I think I have an idea that could fix that issue, even if it's a bit out there of a suggestion. Once per turn, target one monster in either graveyard, and if it would be used as material for a fusion summon of a fossil monster, it can be treated as the designated level for that monster's summon. This would alleviate so many issues, with needing to get lucky in order to get the perfect setup to make your monsters, or, in an even worse case, being unable to make cards such as Skullgios because your opponent just isn't playing monsters of a certain level. Plus, being able to treat a monster as a certain level means you could use a Link or Xyz monster for the summon, allowing you to banish cards such as Promethean Princess in the process. I don't know if an effect like this would be very realistic, since it's something very few cards do, but I think it would be one of the best effects fossils could possibly get. So that was all of the original cards from the first video, but we still have 3 more cards that would have been skipped. The first of which is Dowsing Burn, which is a normal spell that banishes a monster from your opponent's graveyard, then destroys a monster they control with the same type and an equal or lower level. It's honestly not that terrible of a removal spell, even if it does show a bit of its age. 1-for-1 removal is a bit more situational nowadays, only being amazing if your opponent is playing a deck that revolves around having a single guy on field, and in terms of being generic removal, it's outclassed by Subversion and Herald of the Abyss, or you know, kaijus. However, what does have something going for it is that it doesn't target, and more importantly, removes a card from the graveyard. This can provide some useful utility, preventing the monster from floating into a card from the graveyard or removing cards that interact while in the graveyard, provided the monster you targeted shares a type. Hell, the need for there to be a level is a massive killing blow to this card. Now, likely the level change would be removed, or changed to be level rank or rating, similar to other cards that previously only worked with levels, but another change could revolve around making it mention Fossil Fusion, specifically removing any requirements if Fossil Fusion's in graveyard, allowing it to be a more powerful piece of removal if you already have a bit of setup. Another change for it could be going the route of bonding, and giving it an additional effect you could use instead, such as the ability to search a card that mentions Fossil Fusion. This at present would just grab something like Miracle Rupture so you could Foolish Soldier, but with the new cards we talked about, you would have an amazing target in Uluru, which the decks certainly need. Definitely a good card to give them if it was handled properly. Half-Life, oh my god, just like the video game, is a quick play spell that can only be activated when a monster is destroyed by battle, preventing the destruction by halving its attack points. That may sound like a weak-ass protection spell, but it was actually used offensively in the anime, keeping Infernal Wing on field so Skull Knight could attack twice. And it is here that I think anime, we need to start making changes because Skull Knight works differently in the anime than it does in the real world. In the anime, it simply had the ability to attack twice on monsters, while in the real world, it gains a second attack after destroying a monster in battle. So if this card worked like how it did in the anime, it wouldn't work with Skull Knight, which would be a massive shame, especially since Konami does like making cards function like how they did in the anime if they can. So an easy change would be to make it so it revives the monster that was destroyed this turn, so that way Skull Knight's effect works with it. And I could even see it extending to effect destruction to revive your own card. Now this does raise an issue where if you revive a card to your opponent's field, it would trigger their on summon effect, but making it negate the summoned monster would prevent you from doing that. But what if we wanted to revive our own guy? Wouldn't negating it make it worse? Well, the solution to that is quite simple. Give it a clause that if the monster brought back does not mention Fossil Fusion, its effects are negated and its attack is halved. This would allow you to combo the card for more damage, while not giving your opponent any advantage on the summon, as well as being able to use it to revive your own guys if they get outed. I could also see it giving some sort of protection, such as banishing itself from the graveyard for recoverability and protection, though truthfully I don't think this would change anything, because I feel like if you're playing this card you're probably winning the same turn you activated it. It's definitely the weakest card we've talked about all day, though I could potentially see some fun stuff being done with it. The final fossil related card we have is the normal spell, Fossil Hammer. It just punches your opponent in the face. The jokes aside, its actual effect is to destroy a monster your opponent controls, then summons a monster to the field with a lower level than it. Okay, so I know I've brought this up several times throughout this video, but how does this work with Lynx and Xyz? Do they just not get a monster back? Truthfully, it is a good enough card, giving you some removal so you can OTK easier, or at least it would if it didn't give your opponent a guy back, and one that can use its effects. Well, as mentioned with Half-Life, the solution would be to negate the monster's effects when summoned back, and I do think summoning back a guy does give you room for your Fossil Fusions to use their effects, and I do think the summon back effect gives us some room to work with the Fossil Fusion related effect. The immediate thought is that if you have Fossil Fusion in your graveyard, your opponent doesn't get to summon a monster back to the field, meaning you get an open chance to attack them directly. But I think there's an even more effective thing we can do. If you have Fossil Fusion engraved, you get to choose what gets summoned back to their field. Not only would this pair well with all your monster effects that trigger when they destroy a card in battle, but it can allow you to turn something like a hand trap into a way of OTKing your opponent. Oh, what's that? You want to Ash Blossom my Rupture? That's fine. Hope you're okay with me running into her and dealing 10,000 damage. As for a possible graveyard effect, fuck it, let it just banish itself to recycle 3 cards that already mentioned Fossil Fusion. Give the deck a bit more recovery. Overall, a very decent card for this deck, although I do find it very weird that this deck has 2 generic room removal spells for it. Also, while I don't talk about artwork for these cards much in these videos, I do want to say I hope that when this gets printed, the artwork gets changed from this very boring one where it's just a fist coming towards you, and is instead changed to Melissa's Edge getting fucking pummeled. So that was all the fossil related cards from the anime. But there is one more thing I want to talk about, and it's about a card that doesn't exist. Just like with Omega Plus and Magnet Warriors, there's a very important fossil card that we are missing, which is the level 6 Fossil Dragon. There's been a lot of speculation about what this could be or do, but I want to quickly throw my hat into the ring because I think there's a very interesting choice that we could make for it. I personally believe that the level 6 Fossil Fusion Dragon should be based on the Dark Triceratops skeleton that was summoned off of Dowsing Burn. It's one of the most striking visuals from that duel, and it fits extremely well into the dragon theming with the wings, and fittingly, both of the fossil dragons deal piercing damage, and Dark Triceratops' only effect is also piercing damage. I don't think this one card would fix the entire archetype, but I think it would be a nice way to complete the set. And really, that's the important thing that comes from all these cards. Fossils have several issues that need to be released, but none of them are bigger than the lack of a main deck. With so few cards in the main deck, and several of them not actually being good, the need for several new cards is very apparent. I don't think we'll be seeing any of these anytime soon, sadly, at least not until we get some proper legacy support, which will likely include retrains of Fossil Diner and Gaia Plates. So by then, this issue should be solved, and this fan requested archetype will finally be given the chance to shine like it always has deserved. My name is Era, and thank you for listening to this little story.